Check, check. We're just checking audio, folks. Apologies for the sound. Just making sure we sound good. Check, check. Check, check. Hello, test, test, test. 1, 2, 1, 2. Checking audio. Checking audio. Check, check. 1, 2. Check, check, check. 1, 2, 3. Testing, testing, testing. Check 1 2. Check 1 2. Apologies, this is just an audio check. We are streaming live this morning across YouTube, just trying to make sure that we get a good audio signal. One, two. Check, check. 1 2. 1 2.
Well, just now, I just did. So I'm going to check the audio one more time. But any other potential why it would be? Right. Oh, that I bet is the issue. So I'm going to unplug that and just try that. I bet that's exactly what it is. Okay, cool. Thank you. All right, hope this is the last time. Thanks. Bye. All right, let's try it one more time. I think
It's still double. I'm hearing it from the mic on camera. Test 1 2. test 3, audio test 4. Audio test 5, audio test 6. Level check 1, level check 2. Level check 1, level check 2. Level check 1, level check 2. Level check 1, level check 2.
Say level check 1, level check 2 again.
Level check 3, level check 4. Level check 5, level check 6. Level check 7, level check 8. Can do it.
No, if you want to, no, just take a look real quick, and we'll just do it. I'll just do a check right now. Your Zoom's on, right? All your stuff's on.
Yeah.
Check, 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 check. Check, check, 1, 2, check. Check, check, check.
Good. We're good.
Cool.
Morning, everybody. We'll be kicking off the annual meeting in just a few minutes. Hopefully we have ample coffee for everyone this morning. We're quadruple what we had yesterday, so hopefully that's enough. Cool. Well, we'll go ahead and get kicked off here. Just a brief overview of the agenda items this morning. We've got presentations from Jen Blair, Ashley McFarland, and we have Chuck Skypeg and Aaron from Hartwick that are going to update us on the state of craft malt. So looking forward to that. Start off, just a brief acknowledgement of our current board. We've got myself, Brent Manning, got Twyla Souls, Joel Williamson, Joel Alex, Andrea Stanley, Ashley McFarland, Dave Thomas, Chris Swersey, and Chris Schooley, all of which have, and Brandon Aid as well, who've done a phenomenal job of helping us steer the ship this year as craft malt has exploded, and we've seen a huge uptick in growth that you'll hear a little bit more about in the coming presentations later on in the meeting. So I wanted to kind of kick off with just kind of a discussion about, speaking of our board members, we do have 4 regular membership seats open for re-election this year, or new members to come on, and 1 associate member level board seat coming up as well. So this is an exciting opportunity. If any of you guys have ever had any interest in helping guide this organization, we're looking for, we like to keep a nice broad geographic range. We want to keep representation across the country, as well as the different parts of the industry that we're working with, whether that's research, farming, actual production. So we're looking for those different points of view that can really help shape the next stage of where we're going. We're in one of those crucial stages where, some of the founders are starting to cycle off, and it's a really great opportunity to bring in fresh perspective and new energy onto the board. So we have Twyla Souls, Dave Thomas. We have Chris Schooley's seat is also up as well, and Ashley's seat. So there's going to be a lot of opportunity. So if you guys have any questions about what it means to be a board member, I can run through some of the basics on time commitments and so forth. So term limits are 2 years, and what we're basically looking for is participation in the monthly board meetings. It's a 2-hour call, hopefully done at a mutually convenient time where everybody can get involved. So you'll be required to review the board packet. This is just a basic couple-page document before each meeting that brings you up to speed on where we're at and some of the decisions that need to be made on the call. We're going to keep the annual meeting rolling, keep that as part of this conference, so that's part of the deal as well. And then we've done a board retreat in the past. We're still on the fence as to whether that's going to continue, but if that happens, that would be another request. So that's where we're at. We're excited to see the board continue to grow, and we're really, having Jen on board has been tremendous as well, helping to sort of herd the cats along the way. So we used to do this, everything was in April. We did the meeting, we did the elections and all of that. So now that we're sort of standing alone as our conference, we're going to keep the election schedule as the same. So that's going to be happening in April, and we'll be accepting nominations until the end of February. So if you have any questions, speak to one of the existing board members, or if you'd like to get in get involved, nominate yourself, or have someone you'd like to nominate speak to me or either Jen about making that happen. So I may just pass the mic to Jen to do a membership overview.
Good morning, everyone. I'm glad to see that most of us survived another night and made it here in the slush and snow. It was actually warmer in Bozeman this weekend than it was in Asheville. Sure. How's that? Better? Okay. So this past year, we restructured our memberships from the regular and associate to 4 different levels to better capture our expanding and more diverse membership that we're experiencing. So we have member malt houses, and those are malt houses that are currently producing malt for sale. We have international and developing malt houses, and those are the ones that are in production or are outside of the Americas. We also have Allied Trade, which is you've met a lot of them this weekend. They're our sponsors. We've got people like the Brewers Association. We have other trade associations. This year we also gained the North Carolina Craft Brewers Guild as an Allied Trade member, as well as the Illinois Craft Brewers Guild. And these are the people who supply us with our equipment and our research, and also just other industries who are interested in supporting the craft malt movement. And then we also have individual memberships, which captures some of you out there who are maybe just barely starting to think about this whole malting thing and what's involved. It also includes our farmers and our growers, students, smaller brewers, and distillers. So this year, as of right now, we have 55 member malt houses. We have 39 international or developing malt houses, 37 Allied Trade members, and 118 individual members. So we're looking for this next year to grow that. If you're not a member, you're welcome to sign up. Don't feel obligated. Being part of the guild should not feel obligatory. I want to earn your membership, all of you. I want to earn your membership. You do not owe it to me. It's just not something you do every year, just pay your guild dues. So I want to make sure that we're providing you value. If you are interested in joining and maybe you have some hesitations about whether the guild's right for you, talk to me about it and we'll figure out how we can provide value to you. That's what we're here for. Also, if you're not a member, I have a discount code for you for this year for attending the conference. Just see me afterward. I can give that to you. That's good for the entire year until next year's conference. So if you need some time to think about it, which I know none of you do, just come and talk to me and that'll be great. We'll get you all signed up. And I think that's really all I have about the membership overview this year. Does anybody have any questions? All right, then I'm going to have Joel Alex come up and do the year in review. Thank you, guys.
It's great. Jen and I are the same height, so everyone should be able to hear me fine. So it's been a big year for us, and I would say that the first and biggest thing we did this year probably was recruit a new ED. Last year at this time, we didn't have an executive director, so we are beyond pleased and excited to have gone through a process and welcomed Jen to lead our organization, and we've been very, very happy. So she came on a few months ago, and a lot of what we've accomplished this year has been in the months that Jen has been leading us. So she just came in and took on a lot. So this year, a few of the things that we've accomplished, we have a new quality and safety manual published and out. We talked about it last year. We published it in January. It's available at the Craft Malters table for you to look at, take a peruse. It's $29.99. Member malt houses do get one free copy, which you can pick up at the Craft Malters Guild table out there. So please be sure to do that before the end of the day. It's a resource for you, and it's pretty amazing if you have a chance to take a look at it. We've also been, took the time at, well, I guess I should say, we took the time at our retreat to really identify with Jen and the board the direction and where we want to be working. And so you'll sort of see the rest of what we accomplished start to fall into different categories. And we really identified our key priority areas as a guild to provide increased member value and to examine member value, to look at quality and safety, hence the quality and safety manual. A lot of that work is going into sensory, bringing the flavor to the table, as we say. And then also our third priority area that we identified for this next year is increased awareness and education, encompassing not only maltsters but brewers, growers, and the general public about the fact that malt is in the beverages they love to consume so much. So within that, those priority areas, we did the quality and safety manual out there, get it. We also worked with the base malt sensory map to really think about quality and flavor and what our malts are bringing. It is available folded or flat, also at the guild table. We only have folded today for $9.99 at the CMG table. And I guess you talked to Jen about when flat ones are coming. It's a great sales and it's a great training tool. I really encourage everyone to get one. We also, around malt sensory and quality, have been implementing the Malt Sensory Ambassador Program. That program, I'll talk about it a little bit, was funded by a VA grant. We have trained malt ambassadors to go out and talk about the hot seat method and malt sensory. We've had ambassadors go to universities, brewing programs, brewers, distillers, and training them so that they can use this powerful tool and help realize the value of your malt. So expect more from that this year, including hopefully opportunities to train in being a malt sensory ambassador, if that interests you. We also, prepared for this conference. This is the first year that the conference is being hosted by the Guild, and we have over 170 attendees here. We have from 5 different Canadian provinces, 30 states, and Japan, Germany, France, and UK. So we're getting bigger every year, and I know I've heard people talk about that. We're really excited to also start to geographically move this around and really capture, everyone in our community. So also this past year, in terms of education and outreach and awareness, we participated in the MBIC trip to Washington, which I'm blanking on that. That is the MBIC. That's right. National Barley Improvement Committee went to Washington, D.C. to lobby legislators on behalf of us and the malting barley industry, talking to legislators and policymakers, trying to make it all easier for us to do our jobs and get more resources into research that will help us and help our industry. We also have continued, the continuing education program of our webinar series. We've done in February coming up. We have distillers malt, malt sensory, or no, this was last year. Distillers malt sensory, smoking malts, water usage and recycling, and in December we had gluten-free malting and brewing. Coming up in 2018. We have how to host successful field days, working days, agritourism. We have workshops on specialty malts like Vienna, Munich Crystal, and the rest. grain handling, automation in the malt house, kilning recipes, and if you have any other suggestions, I know we're open to it and would try to incorporate them into our year. So, a lot of this work has been funded by grants from the Brewers Association. So a big thank you to the Brewers Association. I know we do have Chris Sweezy here, but I think we also have Chuck Spycheck, and they have been tremendous. It deserves a round of applause. Tremendous in supporting our industry and helping us really come up and do great things. So with that was again the Malt Sensory Ambassador Program. We had 15 Malt Sensory ambassadors trained as part of that grant, and then the quality manual and safety manual were also there along with some of our larger visioning. So with that, we are very much looking forward to what is coming in 2018. Hope to have more of your input and direction and ideas to take with us. With that, we're actually gonna, I think, transfer to Chris Sweezy, who I just mentioned. Last minute change. Chuck. We're going to work with Chuck, who is a former board member of the Craft Maltsters Guilds until a couple years ago. So Chuck is fantastic. So Chuck will be giving us a little bit of an update on the state of malting industry. So welcome.
Thank you, Joe. So, a disclaimer, your program says Chris Swearzy, so I am not Chris Swearzy. Chris wasn't feeling well this morning, so I'm standing in for him. I might say, if I seem like I don't know the material, I would be lying because I originally was scheduled to do this presentation, and we gave it to Chris, and now it's back to me. So, let's see. So I am from the Brewers Association. A lot of you know that. Let's see if we can figure out how to work this. Okay. So the Brewers Association represents American-owned craft breweries. There's currently 6,000 craft breweries in the U.S. Okay. What? Mm-hmm. All right, thank you, Brent. So where was I? We just recently last year passed that 6,000 number for operating breweries in the U.S., and 4,200 of those are our members. So that's right around 72%. So the vast majority of members of our breweries in the U.S. are members of the Brewers Association. So we put our purpose on there, and our purpose is to promote and protect American craft brewers, their beers, and the community of brewing enthusiasts. And I think the word the two words in there that I think are meaningful for me to talk about in this context are, one, community, because farmers, maltsters, all the suppliers are part of that brewing community. So we recognize that, and we want to, like I say, both promote and protect the entire community, not just our brewery members. And that protect part is important too, because really one of the motivating factors for us to get involved with craft malting is to protect our supply chain for our members. And it's just really great to see, malting is was that kind of big monolithic business for a long time until craft maltsters came along, and it's really great to see this industry, your industry, broadening those sources of of raw materials for our members. So we're just going to go through a couple of highline items here. If I can get the slides to advance. Okay, I got it. One thing I want to just bring to attention. Earlier this year, we announced our 2018 research grant recipients. If anybody wants to get any more information on that program, I'll be glad to talk to anybody about it. But we funded $440,000 in research projects for 2018, 12 of them addressing barley and 6 addressing hops. So you guys got the majority, barley got the majority of our money this year in terms of research. And those are addressing things like breeding and variety development, sustainability, flavor origins, and flavor results. We're going to talk a fair amount about flavor results. So those of you who know Chris know he's a little corny, so I'm working with his slide deck, so we're going to talk about the good. We'll get to the bad and the ugly. But so some of you have probably seen this slide. This is U.S. brewery count from 1873. You know, what an interesting graph that is. You can just, you see that dip right towards the middle, that's Prohibition, and then you saw that gradual decline till we were just around, well under 100 breweries in the United States, and how differently that's changed. One of the interesting things about the recent part of this slide, this graph, is you can fit the growth of the few years of growth of craft malting onto this slide, and it fits real well. So that kind of slow growth at first, and then accelerating in the number of craft maltsters. It's interesting to see that you can fit your industry fits onto this slide. I don't like this slide. One, it's kind of confusing, and two, it doesn't really tell the health of craft. This is craft beer production growth. That's how much beer has been brewed in the United States by percentage, by percentage growth. So, we had those really heady years a few years ago where we were growing in double digits. And to me, it's not a good way to express our growth, because every year that you grow and get bigger, it's harder to make those percentages, right? So our growth has slowed down. I hear from a lot of people, craft is declining. No, the percentage growth rate's declining. Our actual volume rates continue to rise. Not as quickly as they did, but they continue to rise. That number for 2017 is an early estimate. These numbers are done by our chief economist, Bart Watson. He's usually dead on. So we're looking at about a 5 or 6% increase for 2016 is the early estimate. So we'll have those numbers in the next month or two and be announcing the actual numbers. Getting to flavor, I just want to talk about a few things that have kind of transpired this year that it's always good to, I was going to make an analogy, it's like planting seeds, so I guess for the farmers in the room. But this was our malting barley characteristics for craft brewers that we published 4 years ago. And this is where we called for a change in the varieties and the characteristics of malt for all malt brewers. So much of the research and so much of the emphasis for decades was on adjunct malt, adjunct barley. And we called for, lower protein levels, lower diastatic power, and then more importantly, malts with flavor. And that's something that, craft maltsters can certainly satisfy, is that call for flavor. And we're starting to see that. So if you, the American Society of Brewing Chemists published 2 papers late last year from Oregon State University talking about the development of flavor based on terroir and variety and what goes on in the malt house. So, finally people are talking about flavor in barley and malt, and it's just really, really good, to see that developing, and you guys are such a big part of that. Another thing coming up, this is pretty new. American Society of Brewing Chemists has the International Brewers Symposium on Malt Flavor and Aroma in Beer. Okay, first time ever that conference is going to be put on. There's been one on hops for a while. Can you believe that? Yeah, certainly. Finally, we're getting that recognition for malt. Our production share as for craft brewers continues to rise. I'm looking at that number. 13.7% of the production of the volume production in the U.S. is currently beer is currently produced by craft brewers. We're almost up to 20% in terms of dollar value. Okay, so this is beer volume. Dollar volume is closer to 20%, and that's malt consumption. All malt brewers, craft brewers use a lot more malt. Higher gravity was one thing. All malt and no adjuncts is another. Efficiency is probably another, the reason that they use so much malt. But, our members, our craft members, not the larger adjunct brewers, we're using we estimate 40% of the malt produced in the U.S. That makes me think of one thing that I meant to say with that growth slide. So let me see if I can just go back there for just a second. So we're seeing slowing growth, but we're still seeing growth. And the devil's in the details here. And as the industry slowed down a little bit in terms of its growth, different parts of it, with 6,000 breweries, 4,200 members, we have a lot of different business models and a lot of different types of breweries. Where we're really seeing more of the decreased growth is in our larger production members. Some of them are doing really well, some of them not so much. And so we're seeing mixed results in in our larger volume members. With our smaller volume members, a lot of those newer breweries, we're still seeing really, really rapid growth. So what does that tell you? That tells you that demand for those small local products is just as strong and growing. And that's real important I think for craft maltings, because those smaller brewers, I think, are really your targets, that especially with your production volumes, that your smaller local guys are the ones that I think you'll be successful with. And I did want to go back to that slide and mention, I failed to mention that. We put this back up here. Joel mentioned the Craft Malter Quality Resources. We think this is real important that this was published. I hope I get this right, but Aaron did a lot of work on that, and Dave Thomas did a whole lot of work on that, I believe. And who are you pointing to, Dave? Oh, Ashley. Okay, I'm sorry. So, and Joel did mention that this was funded by the Brewers Association, and is one of our commitments to this group that we want to see this group thrive and be successful. So Joel did mention that all Craft Malter members get a free copy, so make sure and pick that up. And we're really glad to see this publication come to light. One more thing that's happened this year that's really has not been announced, so maybe this is the first public announcement of this, but the testing lab, USDA ARS testing lab in Madison, has always given scores for adjunct malts. Well, Chris and I were talking with that lab last year, and making sure that they're aware of our white paper with malting barley characteristics for all malt brewers. And so this is their scorecard that they use for evaluating malts in Madison, and they are going to add a scoring column for all malt beers coming up here real soon. So next time you see that, you'll see there's two scores for adjunct beers, adjunct barleys and all malt barleys. The bad, we're going to not try to talk too much about the bad today, because there's not that much bad, but there's always the barley acres. I try to look for the silver lining in this. Everybody's aware of this slide, so I don't think I have to really talk about declining barley acres in the United States. We all know that's happening. to me, that represents, to a large degree, opportunity, because what this represents is barley becoming a specialty crop and not a commodity crop. And, that means, I think, increased value throughout the chain. I think it also means increased consumer awareness as it really moves towards more of a specialty crop. That is, people are going to start paying more attention to flavor in barley, flavor in malt, and the resulting flavors in beer. So I'll look for the good. I'll try to say that slide's actually good in the long run. So we're going to get to the ugly. I'm going to guess that Aaron's following me, so I'm guessing he's going to comment a couple of these things too. But these are two relatively recent news articles about glyphosate. Who in the room knows what glyphosate is? So most people. So I don't have to go into a lot of detail. So it's the most commonly used herbicide in the world. It was developed by Monsanto, and I'm not trying to make any political statements here, but it's primarily used, with the production of GMO corn and soybeans. It's everywhere. You guys are drinking water and you're drinking coffee this morning. You have trace amounts of glyphosate in there. It's so permeated everything. These two news articles, one of them was from Germany a couple of years ago, where a non-governmental organization tested German beers for glyphosate. And guess what? They found it. Because, again, it's everywhere. The amounts that they found were minuscule, just on the order of having to drink 800 liters to get to the tolerance level from the European Union. The article from EcoWatch is from a group called Mothers Across America, who called out wine in the U.S. a few years ago for the same thing. Well, we got a call late last year from Mothers Across America, and guess what? They've been testing beers. Okay, and guess what? They have found glyphosate in beers. Again, minuscule amounts, and this just very, very small amounts. So we expect to see that material, those figures published here in the coming months. We were able to respond in what we thought was a very, very positive way. What this slide is what I'll call position papers from both the Brewers Association, from AMBA, and from BMBRI, stating that we don't want glyphosate in beer or used on barley that goes into making barley malt and then into beer. And I think we caught this group off guard by saying, hey, here's what we think, and here's what we don't want. And I think a couple of important things to note on that are, one, glyphosate is not labeled for use on barley, malting barley in the United States. Okay, it is illegal to use it. So why would you use an herbicide on barley? Well, as a desiccant to dry it down before harvest. Aaron, correct me if I'm wrong on this, but it is labeled for use in Canada, but BMBRI in Canada, the trade organization for the maltsters, says their members will not accept barley that has had glyphosate used on it. So it's just important, I think, for people to know in the coming months, because you're liable to get media requests about what's going on here. And when you see those levels of glyphosate tested in beers, again, they're residuals. A lot of times, of course, if a farmer's using glyphosate on GMO corn in a rotation, there's been disputed scientific evidence about how long it lasts in the soil. But again, it's so common, it's everywhere. So I just, I don't want to end on that note, but I did want to make sure that everybody's aware that the way to combat this is to know that you don't want to buy barley or buy malt that has had glyphosate used on it. Like I say, in the U.S. it's illegal, and those amounts that people start talking about, testing methods are so good, it's just very, very vanishingly small. So I'm just gonna end there. I don't know, you guys want me to do questions, or so I'm glad to take any questions about anything we've covered here or anything else. Andrea. I don't know the answer to that. Do you know, Aaron? The question is glyphosate legal use on wheat in the U.S. and I'm getting a not on malting barley, but I'm getting an answer here that yes, it is. Brent. Yeah, so Brent's question is talking about the acquisitions in 2017 by the larger brewers. There are certainly fewer. So when we keep kind of two sets of statistics for, I guess I'll say, political reasons. When a brewery is acquired by one of the larger brewers, it comes out of our set of statistics for craft brewers. It remains in our statistics for calculating like all malt brewers. Okay, this is totally my personal opinion, not necessarily the Brewers Association. I don't think we're going to see many more acquisitions. If you take a map of the U.S. and put push pins in it, where ABI has bought breweries, you'll see a pretty geographic coverage. And I think they're trying to develop regional brands, and some of those regional brands and the national brands. I just don't think you're going to see many more acquisitions. They're going to be creating too much competition for themselves doing that. So, I may be totally wrong there, but I just don't think we're going to see many more. Anybody else? Okay, well, I'll be around, and if anybody thinks of anything they want to say, and thank you guys for all that you do for our members. So.
Excellent. Thank you for that. So I am going to introduce Aaron McLeod from Hartwick College, who's going to give us a presentation about some of the malt data that he has collected from his work.
Good morning, everyone. Last year at the Farmer Brewer Weekend and then at the annual meeting, gave a talk called Lessons from the Lab. So I sort of have... I think it's interesting that you sort of have a certain view that I'm going to talk about, and we certainly have a lot of data I'm always, when I go to the Craft Brewers Conference, really in awe of the Brewers Association's ability to use data to direct their policy decisions and strategies. Bart Watson, and I think they do such a good job at collecting data and managing that data in a responsible way. So I think when we look forward as our organization, our industry, we can also do that. And so if there's an opportunity for me to contribute, the lab to contribute to that, this is today to sort of help you start to think about how we can do that. So I'm really interested in your feedback on the presentation and other ideas. And a lot of the ideas, what you've seen up here, are drawn from your suggestions. Is it full screen? We're full screen? Yes. Okay, thank you. Okay, you can hear me. So I think most of you are aware the Hartwick College Center for Craft Food and Beverage was launched in January of 2016, and our really mission is to support growth and innovation across the food and beverage, but we're really in the farm brewing value chain. We do that a few ways: technical support. Obviously, we have the testing lab. Education. We do offer seminars and workshops. We just did our 4th 5-day class in malt production. This one was a joint effort between myself, the Hartwick College, IFBM, and Virginia Tech, and we did that in Blacksburg, and we look forward to doing that, I think, every year, maybe in conjunction with this meeting. It seemed like very successful. We have been very fortunate the labs are very expensive, the infrastructure. Sometimes people walk in and sort of like, bland paint on the wall, and they say, is this what $1 million buys? And I say, well, I like to keep the money on the bench. So we were very fortunate to have support from the state of New York, where there's intense interest in farm brewing, also from USDA Rural Business Development and the Appalachian Regional Commission, which is an economic development organization, as well as some private investment. For those of you who haven't been to Hartwick in a while, and just after last year's Farmer Brewer Winter Weekend, we have our expansion lab. So in our second year, we expanded to 1,200 square feet, and we're really, really happy about that, and it's made it a lot easier. We have 2 full-time employees. Megan Douglas graduated from Hartwick Chemistry Department, actually, and started with us in the summer of 2016, and Rachel Trulin just joined us in the summer of 2017. So Megan is doing all of your malt quality testing, and Rachel's doing all of your grain quality testing. So we did about 500 producer-level samples, grains from individual farm level samples between June 1st and October 1st. We are not the only lab. There are at least 2 other labs that I would recommend, depending on your geography. Michigan State University, as well as University of Vermont Extension. Obviously, the core of our program is our malt quality testing program. We've tried to package these services in an affordable, sort of meaningful way. We don't offer a lot of a la carte testing. I get a lot of questions, can you just test my beta-glucan? The way that malt analysis works to do it with affordability is through automation. So we use a lot of automated equipment. So frankly, once we do a Congress mash, the rest is automated, so you get all of the parameters. So if you were just paying for beta-glucan, I would have the other data. So I know that. So it's always good to sort of have a conversation about that. That's why we don't offer single individual things. Also, for instance, if you say, well, I don't need friability, so I don't want to pay for that as part of my package. This again, might seem counterintuitive to you, but it's nice to have the opportunity to sometimes talk about it. So if I have a technician who's doing 25 friabilities, for them to not do one actually takes more time, because they have to sort out which ones to do and not, and create opportunities for error, because then you have an empty spot and they have to write in it. So no, that seems counterintuitive, but actually we really try very hard for accuracy and precision, and through automation, that's how it works. So it would actually cost more to do some of your things if they were a la carte. Again, there's some other we're very fortunate that we're not the only lab, and I think there will be more infrastructure, and I think that's very important as we grow. So I'm very pleased that Montana State University has made a strong investment and commitment to helping, and they have a quality testing lab available with a very similar slate of services. And obviously, many people were aware that if you're in Canada, shipping things across the border is challenging. So the Canadian Malting Barley Technical Center offers fee-for-service malt analysis. They have a few different ways. My only caveat is I would really strongly discourage you from using NIR-type analysis for quality control. It can be very limited in precision. So if you are going to do that, really ask a lot of questions. This year, since we were always trying to move forward with the tests that are important for you guys, we have a slate of food safety, or safety, I don't say food, but safety tests, including mycotoxins, some microbial work, because we get a lot of questions about the levels of microbes on grain, as well as NDMA and GN, because these are important things to be thinking about in your malt house. So we want to make sure those services are available to you. It's sort of not helpful if we stand up here and tell you how important these things are and then don't offer you a way to get information. This one I was really excited about, and regardless of your political stripes, okay, guys, we do have to thank certain members of your government, like Minority Leader Chuck Schumer, helped us get our micro-malting equipment through a USDA grant. So last summer, we started our micro-malting services. We can process up to 16 samples a week. Most of that is right now, that capacity is being sort of used by extension programs who want to do research. So while the Madison lab is very well known, they work with all the public breeders, there's quotas. And so it's very important that that lab is being expanded. But a lot of the state extension agencies didn't have any quota because they hadn't been working with malting barley in the past. So we've got variety screening programs, nitrogen management, and agronomy studies being done. And a lot, you can see that some of these that are working with me here and others do work with Madison. So that's good to know that extension researchers in your areas are working on malting barley because you're asking them questions and they don't have the answers. And once they're doing these trials, then it's very important to get quality measurements, so we provide those services for them. And they pay. Those are mostly grant funded. That also helps to, the more revenue streams we have, the more likely it is that we can keep this affordable for everyone. Just as a connection to the Guild does provide some financial support to the lab in return for member benefit to you. Off of our street pricing there is some discount structures available for member malt houses. Sorry, I'm still trying to learn the new lingo. Member malt houses. You can get a basic malt analysis, our basic package, for just $50. There's no minimums to get that price. You don't have to pay in advance. So our street pricing is pay in advance. So like a grower sends a sample and a check. But for our malt members, for our guild members, we bill quarterly, so it cuts down on paperwork. You can also send as many grain samples as you want for analysis, any of the analysis listed, and we add it to your quarterly bill. So it's a little bit supposed to be more convenient for everyone, including me, because the billing is the least favorite part of my job. Someone once told me that no one loves their entire job, but it's 80% is the goal. So I have to do the billing, but I don't love that part. So I get to do it less if you are a member of the guild. We also do provide certificate of analysis, but in this case, I think it's very valuable, and I've had feedback from the members that they like to get their reports in Excel. I think this is an excellent idea. So that means it makes it easier for you to use your data, pair it with your process data, track it, look for trends, do averages, and manipulate. Right? If you get PDF reports, then you have to type that. You have to type that in somewhere, and so I really want to make sure that you're leveraging your data. 42, I think you said we had some 55 member malt houses. 42 of the members have used the lab, and actually we have 75 malt houses clients. So those are interesting numbers, right? Because not every member uses it necessarily, but there are labs out, malt houses in North America that are members. Absolutely. So remember, I'm talking about numbers, right? So yeah, we receive samples from 75 different production craft malt houses in North America. And to date, I just picked up this number last night, we've tested almost 3,000 samples. So thank you. There's definitely more than one way to work with the lab, and I want to make sure that you work with us the way that is the most beneficial to you. Just getting the quality analysis is, I say, look, it's mostly for you. The lab data is mostly for the malt house. It's feedback for you to improve your product quality. Malting is essentially an optimization process. You get that barley at that new crop, that new variety you've never malted before, and raise your hand, but I don't think anyone gets it on the first try. That takes a lot of skill and luck. Obviously, we do a lot of measures to predict how that barley will perform, but really it's a process of taking a stab at that first steeping regime, right? Working it through the process with your process control, your process feedback, and looking at the result and making a change. The non-fancy word for that is trial and error, but it's really optimization, and data can really speed up that process. You also want to characterize your products so that you can describe their functionality to brewers. You guys make a huge range of malts, and which is one of the best things about craft malt. Commercial malt houses are really good at what they do, but it's hard for them to take risks and try new things when you make 200 or 500 tons at a time. You guys do take risks every day, try new things, and so there's a huge range out there, and being able to characterize and describe the quality is important, so that it's for you and for the brewer. You can monitor your process variation over time. You can validate some of you do a lot of testing in-house. If that's a skill set you bring to the game, I think that's really great. But you can, if you want, we can help you validate your methods just by doing comparisons, right? And sort of dial in your precision and accuracy on your in-house. And we can even help with calibration of your own equipment. So sometimes we have these conversations like, my moisture, someone will say, well, my final moisture with my A&D MX50 is always 0.5% lower than mine, right? The one I get from me on the other end of the phone. 0.5%. And I'm like, well, if it's always 0.5%, that's actually pretty good information. You have a lab bias, that's normal. We use 2 different methods, right? I use gravimetry with an oven. You use it with this thing. I actually don't think it's a problem, because when you make process measurements, it's always, it's relative. But if you want, you could tweak your method to match, or you could apply, a bias adjustment. That's very common. This is an example of a certificate of analysis that I pulled off the internet. A Kraft malt house uses their data. I think it's really cool looking, and I think it's probably enhances, it fits in with their branding. You don't have to have these. In fact, I don't always think it's necessarily a great idea to give away all of the information. Some brewers don't understand that information, and then it can lead to confusion if they're not sophisticated at looking at data. Again, these are probably not lot analysis either. It's more than acceptable to come up with product averages or product ranges. You can say my Pils malt is 2 to 2.5 color. This is very commonly done in the industry, but it is good to have some way to characterize. And frequently brewers ask, for some of this data, but by no means do you have to show it all. This is kind of a nice example. This is another example I pulled off where I believe this is Valley Malt, and they list their products, they showcase them, they list a few key, I like this approach actually, you list a few key metrics that are meaningful to brewers, especially craft brewers are sensitive to a couple of things, color, obviously, it's a big deal to them, and extract yield, as well as some great descriptors. So there's lots of different ways to utilize the data that you get. So any of you that's been to Hartwick, and maybe some of you this year are glad you don't have to climb up those stairs back and forth to lunch. We're on the side of the college is built on the side of a hill, and it does give us an interesting view actually from up there. When you look at 500 farm level samples, you can start to see trends, and I'd like to share some of the trends that we see. Trends in moisture content. This was a big one in 2016. This is just New York, okay? So this is a trend in New York, but I think why it's helpful is because these trends permeate and very similar things can happen in other states. We had a drought. We had essentially no dawn that year, so drought is good for dawn production. We had very high protein though, and one of the things was the final moistures were low because in a drought, farmers tend to utilize harvest timing to ripen the crop before they get it off. Last year in 2017, you can see that all of the data moved up 1% moisture. We had much wetter harvest conditions, and so this is a histogram. It basically shows you the percentage of samples that were greater than 12%, so between 12 and 13, between 13 and 14, between 14 and 15, and that was the problematic one, is that 50% of the grain, right, that came to the lab was between 14 and 15%. So that means they're going to have to do in-bin drying, right, whereas the year before, they wouldn't have had to do in-bin drying. And why is in-bin drying so important? It's important because the length of time that your barley will keep its germination in storage is directly related to the moisture level, okay? This is a graph. We see these charts a lot. There's North Dakota State. This is actually one that was produced in Scandinavia. But the principle is the same, right? These lines represent the amount of time that grain can last in storage. So if we just look at one, so at 50 degrees Fahrenheit and 16% moisture, the safe storage period before germination loss is 20 weeks. Okay, so that's going to get you in some parts of this country to Christmas. But you're still going to want a malt in January, February, March, April, May, June, July, next August, right? So what can you do? Well, if you just take that same barley and dry at 14%, it's 45 weeks is the safe storage time. So with just a 2% reduction in moisture content, you've almost doubled, right? Basically doubled the safe storage time. So that gets you to next harvest. But that's cutting it pretty close. Look at this one. At 12% moisture, which is the equilibrium moisture content for malting barley, and my recommended level for long-term storage, you buy yourself a year and a half is the safe storage time at 50. Now, again, remember that you have different temperatures, right? Temperature storage goes down in the winter and up in the summer. But the principle here is moisture. That's under perfect conditions, by the way. That's if the grain is sound If you have sprout damage, and we assess this through RVA, and those of you who live in and work and procure grain in parts of this country that have wet harvests know about RVA, I think, now, and use it as a tool to manage what you should malt sooner rather than later. Here's just some examples we saw. So the RVAs of these are all sort of moderate to severe pre-harvest sprout damage, right? We consider, between 50 and 100 moderate and between 0 and 50 severe, and that limits the amount of time. So even what this kind of shows you is that if you have the scala there at 13%, which is a pretty decent moisture content for storage, in July, August at harvest, we had excellent germination. We have a little bit of sprout damage, and by December, we had lost a little bit of germination. That's problematic in the malt house. You can see that the synergy held on pretty good at low moisture. The other one, a little bit higher moisture and a little bit more severe damage, didn't hold on as well. The bottom three have pretty severe sprout damage, or I should say pretty severe pre-harvest sprout damage or severe pre-germination, with that RVAs in the 20s there. And by December, these were toast, right? They really needed to be melted right away or not at all. And so this isn't a management tool if you buy 200 tons of barley and plan to malt that all year. If that is your scenario, if you're of small batch size so a big lot of barley and small pieces, you really have to think about the wisdom of buying barley with this severe degree of pre-germination, because if you're counting on it all year. You can work with these grains if you have larger pieces and you can get them through earlier, before Christmas in this case. The New Dale is another example. So it's about the same level of pre-harvest sprout damage, but at higher moisture, they had even less time. One of the solutions to this is harvest timing. If you have the ability to harvest at higher moisture levels and do in-bin drying, post-harvest drying, quickly, then that's great. If you don't, the next best mitigation strategy is varietal choice. What we've seen when we looked at averages across varieties, these are called box plots. There's a lot of statistics in them, but basically the blue bar is more or less the bulk, the range of the bulk of the samples, and the little tick at the bottom and the little tick at the top is like the highest one, the min and the max. But just look at the bars and you say, okay, this is the range of things. So we have this is dormancy. So a low 4 mil germination at harvest. All of these samples, by the way, had excellent capacities. The peroxide values were all 100%. So at harvest, we saw that most varieties are ready to go. Certainly the Western Canadian Spring 2 rows, like Synergy, Metcalfe and Copeland would fall into that category. Most of the spring varieties are ready to go with very little dormancy, or it breaks before the samples even arrive at the lab. TP is one of those winters we saw that had a pretty decent amount. Calypso has the most. I didn't see a Calypso sample that was germinating off the combine. That's excellent protection for pre-harvest sprout damage. And I think we heard that in the presentations yesterday. People say, oh, well, how long am I going to have to wait? That also depends on the variety. We took a few of these samples that had been submitted, and we just kept checking them every month. So you can see that the Violetta broke the dormancy earlier. It still took till about October for them both to be above 95, right? The threshold by which you would want to start malting them. So the funny thing about dormancy is that unlike hot spring barley varieties, right? Copeland, Metcalfe, Synergy, they're probably never malting better than when they're fresh right off the combine. And over time in storage, they tend to lose their vigor. Even if their germination remains great, I'm talking about 1 day germination, how many go on the first day? They lose their vigor in storage. It's the reverse with high dormancy varieties. 2 years later, they would increase vigor in storage. The question we get a lot is, can I just clean out those dead kernels? If you have questions like that, and I would say, well, the conventional wisdom is no, but I don't know. I've never tested it myself, right? The conventional wisdom is no. Let's try. So we took some grain at 80% germination. Okay, had lost some of its germination by Christmas, and I sized it, and then we tested the germination, and no. So yeah, there was a little like the thinnest kernels did have the lower germination. But remember, in a plump grain, they can be only 2% of the sample. So even if you threw out the thins, right, you still have an 80% germination. And even if you kept just the super plump, right, the over 7, you'd still have just an 80 germination. And the difference there between 76 and 80 is not significant. So no, unfortunately, we can't clean out these germination problems. Water sensitivity, this was a very difficult year, and it was interesting talking to some of our international guests, but they experienced water sensitivity across the entire world this year. This is where barley fails to germinate well in the presence of a lot of moisture. So high 4 mil germination energies and low 8 mil germination energies. This can make barley really difficult to malt. It's certainly environmental, but there's also a genetic component. So this is New York only. So all these grains were grown in New York this year. You could see that the most susceptible varieties were the winters, a little more susceptible than the springs, as well as the North Dakota State varieties. Pinnacle is pretty notorious for water sensitivity. You can see that the lowest Pinnacle we saw was like in the 50s, but I know I was talking to some people this weekend from Michigan who have 8 mil germinations, 20 and 30. So the challenge with that is that in steeping, you're trying to achieve at least, certainly cleaning, but 2 things that are happening at the same time. So they're simultaneous, but they're not related. You need to hydrate the kernel fully to get good modification. So you want to get a lot of water into the kernel. You're also trying to start a vigorous start to germination so that malting germination doesn't take 8 or 9, 10 days, right? You're trying to really get it out of the gate. Horses, I always picture it, I want my malting barley varieties to be like, in the horse races where they open that gate and they just go. They don't kind of work to get up to a trot, right? So you're trying to initiate a vigorous germination. And the problem with water sensitivity is that those 2 things are working against each other. You're trying to get water in, and then the barley will hydrate and not want to germinate. Okay, so I'm really going to pull back on the water during steeping, but then you're not hydrated. So it really can be frustrating to barley to work on. This is where assessing for an 8 mil germination in your malt houses is so important, and counting every day. So barley A would be like a dream to malt for me, right? This is very typical Western Canadian style malting barley. Right? It has great 4 mil germination, right, after 3 days, and great 8 mil germination after 3 days. But look at that 8 mil on the first day. It loves the water, right? So this would be like 8 hours underwater. Obviously, this is a very vigorous, so I want to keep that cool. Maybe 8 hours at, 13 degrees Celsius, like in the 50s, right, low 50s, in the mid 50s. And then a long air rest where I keep it cool and allow that germination to start, and then put it back underwater for a second air rest until I get to my target steep moisture and move on. Okay? Of course, keeping it cool because it's going to be really vigorous, that growth. So in those air rests, it's going to be developing already some heat. Now this is where it becomes very challenging. This barley B is this would be like Pinnacle, okay? With you can see that it has a very gray 4 mil. There's nothing wrong with this barley from a germination perspective, but the 8 mil is low, and it's specifically about how it's low. On the first day, they were neck and neck. Once the germination is in inceptu, is conceived. Once you start the germination, you see the chitting at the end of the air rest. That does not want to be back underwater. So in an 8 mil plate, they're just sitting in the water, right? There's a lot of excess water, and that's when it doesn't want to go. So that first steep should be short. You can increase the temperature a little bit to help get the water in quickly. Then you have to air rest a really long time. This is where having good air movement, CO2 extraction or air exchange during air rest is so important, because you've got to give it time to sort of relieve that water on the surface, and then you got to put it underwater for very short amounts of time. So you're actually trimming off time from your second and third immersions and adding it to the air rests. That's where it can be complicated if you have equipment that doesn't allow you to do that. Then the risk management tool is choose varieties that have less of this problem. Protein content is a big one that affects the final quality profile of the malt. Obviously, we can work within the range. We can even work on the edge of the acceptable range. It's very much controlled by environment, by agronomy, how much fertilizer you put on, and by variety. So one thing we saw in New York 2 years ago was that the springs, there was a drought, and so they were all very high protein, and the winters tended to be low protein. I think what we learned from this is that the risks are different. The risk with spring malting barley is that the protein will be too high, because you're going to pick a conservative amount of nitrogen to apply, but you might get a drought, right? So you have to be conservative. I think it's the reverse is what we're finding, at least for us in New York, is that, and probably throughout the Northeast would be similar, the risk for winter barley seems that it'll be too low. So I don't think you have to worry about putting too much nitrogen on some of these crops. I mean, obviously it can't fall over. So this is very much environmental. This is why working with your state and local extension and researchers is so important, because they're doing the same work and they have a lot of, they can have a lot of information. So what is quality anyway, right? You guys, I'm always harping on you. So what do we really mean when we use that word? It's just a word, right? It's just a word unless we define it. So I like to think about it in different ways. It's not just one thing. Ooh, this is supposed to be one at a time. Fitness for use, okay? Something is high quality if it suits its purpose. Well, your stuff's going to be brewed with or distilled with, and so it's got to fit their purpose. That means it has to be functional, right? It has to perform for them. Despite how great you say it is, at the end of the day, if it doesn't perform, it may not be a positive outcome. That also means just meeting their expectations. That also can be challenging, depending on what their expectations are. Do you ever talk about it, the brewer's expectations or the distiller's expectations? I get a lot of questions. How do I make distiller's malt? What kind of distiller are they? Are they a single malt American whiskey distiller? Are they a bourbon or grain distiller? Because they actually have very different expectations about what they need from their malt. So just understanding your customer, so asking what they use now, getting into conversations with them, what they like about the products they use now and what they don't like about the products they use now. Free from defects. Obviously, you wouldn't want, look, they're always going to blame the malt, right? That's fine because you're just going to blame the farmer. But, but frankly, you don't want your malt to be the problem in the brewery. You want it to be the solution, right? You want it to enhance their product. So you don't want there to be defects functionally in your malt, and you want it to be safe, not just for the brewer, but for the marketplace and for your industry, right? These type of things where, these media stories, even though they're not based in science, right? These levels of glyphosate are far lower than the regulatory levels. The levels for glyphosate in drinking water in California are 400 parts per billion. The levels they found on this beer in Europe were 20. But that's not what's important sometimes because of media and spin and public perception. So you don't want to damage the brand of craft malt. And you certainly don't want to damage your brand. Some people say, well, this is artisanal, this is craft. So, functioning, that's not important to us because that's not what we do. We're, okay, that may be the case, but you still have values. What is your brand, right? Is your brand, all local barley? If it is, then sticking to that's important. Sustainability, being innovative, local, and flavorful. These are absolutely 100% part of what makes craft malt successful and your brands successful. And just because I talk more about quality, that's just because that's what I do day in, day out. I absolutely agree that all of those things bring to the package. The only thing I disagree with is that I don't think that any of those things can be a substitute or have to make up for bad quality. I never want us to be on the defensive. I always want craft malt to be high performing, and I push you towards that, and it's a journey. So what is it that brewers really need anyway? Like, what are their expectations? I don't know if you can see this, but this guy's really excited to brew with that nice big bag of Maris Otter there. It says Maris Otter, it says assured UK malt. So he's really super stoked. Obviously, they want extract. They need to make alcohol. They need to make it efficiently and effectively. So you have to be thinking about the extract content of your malt as well as it's being well modified so that they can access that extract, so beta-glucan. They need to convert that then in an efficient manner. So high alpha amylase is the best route to ensuring an efficient and fast conversion. They're used to this being really fast if they are a craft brewer who's primarily been used to using commercial malts. They have very high alpha, so they convert very quickly. So that doesn't mean that if you have lower alpha amylase, just lower alpha amylase, that means the malt is poor. It's just different. But at some point, right, there's a bar, there's a threshold whereby there really would have to be make compensation. So it's a discussion. How much are they willing to compensate? Good wort separation. Brewers don't like it when the lauter takes too long. Of course, it depends how many brews are trying to do the day, obviously. But if you see very high beta-glucan numbers, very low friabilities, and I have a lot of husk peeling, that could be a signal that a brewer may experience difficulty with runoff. So we want good modified malt. And And fermentability. The leading indicators, if you're looking at your own malts for fermentability, are adequate amounts of diastatic power. And there's certainly a range out there in what brewers want to do. One of the interesting things about the work that the BA has done and in putting out these guidelines is that having somewhat lower diastatic power in your malt can actually be good for craft malt. When, the red phone, on my desk at the Grain Commission, our customers in Canada were the big malt houses, right? And they would call and their customers were the big breweries. So a problem for them might be, we really don't like all this Metcalf in the blend because we don't have any control over attenuation in our brewery. So, that was a complaint of a craft malt house. The big craft malt houses to buy commercial malts. By making malts with characteristic profile for craft, you put control back into the brewer's hands. Of course, that does mean that they know how to brew that way. If they're very accustomed to brewing in the same way, maybe not all brewers have the same level of sophistication. Just to that point, I'll remind you, right, that you do have to modify the malt. This is barley that's there on the left, right? This is when you in the lab, we put our X-ray goggles on that allow us to see right inside. That's beta-glucan. You break that down during malting. So that could be 1, 2, 3, and 4 days, okay? But remember, malting is not something that is always going to, germination is not something that's always going to take 4 days. You have to continue to, work with the grain so that for a different variety, that could be day, 3, 4, 5, and 6. Okay, so it depends on the variety. It depends on the vigorousness of the germination. If you stop at some point and there's too much of, half kernels not modified, partial kernels not modified, so this would be low friability. Who here has a friability? That's great, guys. When you look down into the friability, you have X-ray vision. If you ever see these whole kernels, that's those. If you see those half kernels, those are those in the middle. You didn't modify them completely. Could be a number of different reasons, but you have X-ray vision with that friability. You get to see what's going on in the inside at the end of the process. Remember that if you don't break down those areas, then that starch is not available to the brewery. So regardless of what the fine grind extract is, right, the coarse grind extracts, more like what the brewer is going to achieve because they mill with a coarser grind than we do in the lab, that will start to become impactful. So always look at your fine grind extract with your beta-glucans in mind. And when you look at those two, so always look at all of the data in context. So what can you do to improve endosperm modification? Barley genetics. Some varieties malt easier than others, I say, right? They have a tendency to get the beta-glucan lower. Kernel hydration. Make sure that you are fully hydrating your kernels. At the end of steeping, steeping isn't about a certain amount of time underwater, or it's not even about achieving a certain specific moisture value. It's about fully hydrating the kernel. And if you need to talk about some tips and tricks for doing that, come talk to me anytime. And then it's basically germination, moisture, temperature, and time, and the combination of those varieties. Haze is something that we measure in the lab, and it can be a very interesting leading indicator of the quality, overall sort of quality of the malt. Here's an example of 3 Congress worts. Number 1 there is really clear. That's probably as clear as they get. Maybe that's not a great picture. Oh, yeah. It's pretty good. And then the one in the middle is kind of medium haze, and then there's like the really haze. The problem with haze is that there's many, many factors that can lead to it. So it can be difficult to sort of diagnose. Certainly, one of the most common is if you're under-modified and you have a lot of beta-glucan, you have hazy wort. Now, if you're well-modified, we still sometimes see it, and it can be, if the alpha amylase is really low, then you haven't degraded all those dextrins, like the medium chain length starch, and so they end up with what's called this dextrin haze. Too low soluble protein, not enough proteases to break down the big pieces of protein, leave them behind, and they cause haze. Too high soluble protein, right? Too much soluble protein degradation, too many peptides, and we get some haze. The other one is microbial activity. Sometimes when all of those things are fine, it can be related to the way that the microbes don't. As Patrick told us, there's a lot going on in malting, right? The barley's trying to grow a plant. You're trying to minimize that. You're trying to convert the endosperm and generate enzymes, right? The microbes are also trying to have an existence and a party, right? And if you are malting under more or less warmer temperatures, then that is sort of encouraging that behavior. Microbes exude enzymes, and those enzymes go to work breaking down your barley, your malt, usually the husk, and they release fragments that cause haze. that can be exacerbated by CO2. So if you have if you're recirculating a lot of air in germination to try to keep temperatures where you want them, there's CO2 in that air, right? And so that can sort of aggravate the microbes. And then high temperature germination, keeping everything cool can really help with that. Wort pH is not something that I ever looked at in the past. I had never seen a bad one. And so, in micromalting, there's a lot of airflow. And so, we never, and normally we don't malt barleys that are marginal in quality, right? Because it's like we're not going to learn anything about the variety if it has poor germination. So we're only, micromalting under these sort of idealized conditions. The thing is, I've noticed it can be a really great sort of leading edge indicator of what's going on in your germination. So a normal range for Congress wort pH, and this is really important. When we report the lab data, it's on Congress wort. Don't give the pH value to your brewer. It doesn't have any impact. If they brew with your malt that has a 5.8 Congress wort, that's not going to be the pH of their brew wort, right? Because they're going to do things. So this data is for you. The normal range is about 5.8 to 6.1 that we see. It's always lower for higher color malts, so that's fine. Don't worry about that. Your Munich malts and all of those have very low wort pH. Brice presented a poster on that a couple years ago at ASBC, so don't worry about that. But if in your base malts you have chronically low wort pH, I'm talking lower than 5.7, it can be an indication that maybe not everything is right during germination, because that's evidence of anaerobic respiration, right? Aerobic respiration that produces enzymes and modification is good, right? And anaerobic, you get that lactic smell when you walk in there, that fermentive smell. It can be so bad, poor airflow, like not enough CO2 movement, maybe too many dead kernels. The other thing is track these things over time, right? So if you get a lab analysis on a regular frequency, every batch or a periodic frequency, you should be tracking trends. Sometimes data, when you look at large amounts of it, it's hard to visualize, so plot it. This is just batch after batch after batch plotted. Maybe this was over the course of a year, okay? Everything was going fine, and then things started to sort of drop, right? And then the pH just kept dropping and dropping and dropping. So maybe this barley was losing its germination energy, right? And then these dead kernels are slowly kind of lowering the wort pH. The other thing is you didn't have to wait necessarily until it was that bad, right? If you're monitoring it regularly, you can start to see the trend earlier. So please look at your data you're getting back. You pay good money for it. Make sure you look at it and examine trends is the thing there. Nitrosamines was mentioned a couple of other times. I won't belabor it. There is a federal action level on nitrosamines in the U.S. It's 10 parts per billion. That means that it would be considered actionable if a composite of 10 subsamples of finished product, so not just like one batch, but if it's a composite of at least 10 batches were to show a level above the action limit, then the FDA could take legal action to remove that product from the marketplace. The risk factors for nitrosamines, I think, are widely known. Direct fired kilns may put you at high risk. Also being industrial emissions, like I suppose if a malt house was located in an industrial area. So mitigation strategies, there are several. Switching to indirect fired kilns, using low NOx burners if you are dead set to use direct fired kilns. And then if you don't have either of those, then you must burn sulfur in your kiln. And that is a very commonly accepted practice to lower your NDMA to acceptable levels. The other safety issue we've been talking a little bit about this weekend, and I know people haven't heard as much about it in the past because it's related to all malt spirit production, which is a really exciting new growth area of spirit production in the U.S. and great for craft malt because they're all malt. So just like craft brewers, we love American single malt whiskeys. There are risk factors in barley for certain safety issues in spirit production. That's mostly genetic. And generally, if they use copper, like in copper stills, that's also a risk factor. So the mitigation would be choosing varieties that, since it's genetically controlled, that are non-producers or low producers, as well as there are things you can do in the malt house to keep the levels low. We have been working on some surveys with some malt houses that have been participating with us, that we asked to participate. So we can see that the varieties on the left are considered very low or non-producing varieties. Odyssey, Full Pint, and Genie. They have specific genes that don't allow them to produce this compound. In the middle there, we have a lot of varieties that sort of have a range of levels. So if they're between 0.5 and 2, they're considered low-producing varieties. So if you can't access a non-producing variety, then you should try to be accessing a low-producing variety for your for the malt that's going into your all malt, your single malt whiskey. And then if you can't access any of those varieties and you're using sort of the high tendency varieties, then you should be thinking more strongly about what can you do in the malt house. You see that even Conlan, although can be high, can also be low, right? So that means that you have to be a little bit more fastidious in the malt house about trying to keep it low. And then I would say in the long run, try to switch over for those products to a low producing variety, and then if you can, to a non-producing variety. So I'm going to wrap it up in a second, but this was actually a suggestion that came from one of you to say, well, what are the other malts like? Because we get the analysis from me, right? You get analysis from me, and analysis isn't the same from malt house to malt house, right? Most of you have heard me before talk about lab-to-lab variation. So I'm like, well, that's a good question. So I just took a bunch of malts that brewers seem to love, right? The Maris Otter, Golden Promise, the Wehrmann Pale, and the Rahr Turo base malt. These are very common in the marketplace, and said, okay, well, this is, if I analyze them, this is what you would see. So that was actually a great suggestion. One of the things I noticed right away was, boy, do they love Maris Otter. And I'm like, they love the flavor, right? And I'm like, well, I would love the flavor too if it was a 4-color, right? So I don't know how much of it came from the variety, but I'll tell you a lot of it's coming from that it's a pale ale style malt, right? And don't forget that terminologies are different around the world, right? So here in the U.S., we talk about base malt. But this isn't base malt in the U.S. That's over there at the Rahr Turo. That's a 2.2. So I bet you they love the color. The other thing I noticed was extracts. All of them have pretty darn good extract, right? The UK stuff has good extract because it's low protein. The North American stuff, even though it's higher protein, has really good extract because of genetics. Rahr Turo base malt right now is 50% Metcalf from Western Canada and 50% Pinnacle blended together. That Pinnacle is probably from North Dakota, right? And those varieties, North American varieties, were bred to deal with our higher protein for higher extract. So brewers are used to getting lots of extract regardless. The other thing I noticed is that they were well modified. All these malts were nicely modified. And although there was a range in DP, which I think is normal, right? We know that those European malts have lower distillate power, and then we know that North American Rahr Turo base malt is like powdered malt in a bag, right? It's great. I respect commercial malt houses a great deal for producing very functional and repeatable malt. The thing that they all do have is adequate amounts of alpha amylase, either lots or adequate amounts of alpha amylase. So remember that Maris Otter is a heritage kind of product, and so it can be lower in some things, but the other, basically most of these have very high alpha amylase, so they are converting very easily in the brewery. So this is just something you can look at if you're thinking about how your malt compares functionally to other malts that are common. There is a lot more than the numbers, though. I am very proud to work with all of you, be the sort of lab guy on your team if you don't have one of your own. You add so much more than that quality to craft malt. You add brand values. So here's the trick. I think, you have to be functionally as good, right? And then when you add all the other stuff you guys bring to the table, it makes your malt better, right? I think if your malt isn't functional and you bring other things, it's sort of a wash. That's just my opinion. So I would encourage you to make a functional malt. Use the supports available, the guidebooks, the tools, the educational pieces of the website, the videos, the talks from Patrick referred to his talk from last year. That video, you can watch his talk on kilning or on modification, is on the website for members. And so use all of those things and make a very functional malt and add all of the terrific value that you do. I heard this quote in a meeting in New York, and I think it's sort of, if you want something to be different, then it isn't going to be the same. Your malts can be very high quality. I see it every day. And they're not necessarily the same as other malts that the brewers use, commercial malts. And that's probably a good thing. So they can be different and not the same. And working with your brewers to understand malting quality, they can work with those and have great. But they can't be bad. Okay, I'm done. Bruno, I think they'll let me take a question. No, and I don't want to. It's not the solution, because I guarantee you, if I test barley, we'll find it. If we test beer, we'll find it. It's so ubiquitous.
Is there a level where we can't tell the difference if the farmer has used it as a desiccant?
Yeah.
And not just because it's present in the environment?
Yes.
That would be my,
I just don't know that.
don't send me barley that has been.
I'd rather you have a relationship with your grower and an understanding and a contract and a relationship than do that. That'd be my recommendation, is that this is fundamentally not something that's best managed through testing, because that test would be expensive. And so I think that's something that's best managed as for your contract specifications and your relationship and partnership with your growers. But that's my opinion, and my recommendation is that you not get into trying to manage that risk by testing. Although I test for a living and my livelihood depends on it, I don't believe that testing is the answer to every problem. Thanks. No problem.
Good deal. I'm going to hand the mic to Ashley for a brief presentation, and yeah. We're going to miss Ashley. She's stepping off the board this year. She's done a phenomenal job helping us on a lot of different fronts. So.
All right, and thank you, Brent. And I do want to thank the Guild for being so opening and welcome to a non-maltster and someone that's really actually just starting to learn in the malting barley and malting world. But what I wanted to do this morning is recognize someone that we all know. And if you do not know her, then you just don't know what craft malting is about in the United States. So first of all, Andrea Stanley, could you please come up on the stage? You may or may not know, Andrea was one of the founding members of the Craft Maltsters Guild, and I affectionately call her the godmother of craft malt. And when I first started learning a little bit about malting barley and this whole craft malt industry, she was like my go-to gal and someone that I could turn to for guidance and understanding, and was just one of the warmest and just kind of open arms person I found early on, and which led me to a lot of other great relationships with many of you in the room, and then also just feeling like I'm a part of the community. And Andrea is leaving the board, which just leaves this tremendous hole. And also her leadership as the president is going to be filled, well, we know, by Brent, so no fear there. But I really did want to just take some time at this conference this year, because I think this is a real kind of changing of the guards of sorts as Andrea goes and takes on other ventures within her life, professionally and personally. And just want to thank Andrea. And this is from the board. Has a little bit of the Malt Me Mama song on it.
Oh my God.
So that's for you. And just want everybody a round of applause for Andrea and her leadership.
Well, I'm just going to say a few words that are, I wasn't prepared to say anything, but something that just comes to mind is a deep appreciation for, you know, Ashley was saying that early on. We did talk a lot as we were all learning this together, and just willingness of people to step up into leadership roles, because our industry is really a nascent industry at this point, and really needs people, just regular people, to step up and just do a little work so that we can all continue to drive craft malt forward, and all of the wonderful ways that craft malt is able to help support local farmers, land preservation, biodiversity of grain, all of that kind of stuff. And it also really enriches like all of our lives. A lot of the conversations I've been having in hallways here is, wow, everybody here just seems like they really love what they do, and they seem passionate, and people are willing to share. Most of us come from other industries, and I would say that most people, when they come into this industry, they realize that we're open and we want to share with each other, and we want to support each other in succeeding. So to me, that success is really here in this room, and I would love to see it continue. So just encourage people, as Ashley did. Like she said, she stepped into the role on the board, and now she's going to be going on to other things, but just think about that. We have an election coming up for the board soon, and it would be great to have a nice, robust group of people thinking about being a part of it. So thanks again for this. This is an awesome honor.
Okay, we're going to take a short break. Just a couple of quick announcements. The media content from the conference is going to be available to members. We'll make an announcement about when that content is available, so stay tuned for that. On the board piece, Jen corrected me. It's a February 10th deadline, so that only leaves us less than a week. So if you're interested, please get involved. And next up, we have Lindsay, and I'm forgetting one other thing. Oh, books, safety manual. Please take one of those with you. And member malt houses. Yes, if you're not, you can buy one. We also may have some beer to send you guys home with as well. So stay tuned for that. But yeah, we're going to take a quick break, and then Lindsay's going to come in and do sensory for us. So. Amazing that this has happened.
Yeah,
so,
you guys are continuing to inspire.
Yeah, man. Awesome. Oh, lovely. Look at that. We're going to be on time. Okay. Do you want me to try to coalesce people better?